We're going to look at our senses in two videos. This is part one, which is going to look more at the kind of scientific side of it. Part two will look more at what I'm calling the religious side, which is to do with the mental processes. So the first part, the scientific part, we're going to look at the different senses and how they arise, how we get sensations from these outer stimuli. So the first stimulus that gives us a sensation that we're looking at is probably the most physical. These are little molecules. Maybe they drift into our nose through the air or come into the mouth from food that we eat or something we drink. And when the molecules match the little chemoreceptors that we've got in the nose and in the mouth, they will fall into these receptors, resonate in harmony, and generate a nerve impulse. And those nerve impulses go to the appropriate part of the brain and stimulate the brain to bring us a sensation of a particular smell or a particular taste. And that's because of the particular sizes and shapes of the molecules. Temperature is very different. Temperature has to do scientifically with vibration of particles. When particles are vibrating particularly rapidly, that for us is an indicator of it being very hot. And we have sensors, receptors in our skin, and when we touch those hot surfaces, they pick up the fact that it's vibrating fast. Again, they're going to send signals, nerve signals, to the appropriate part of the brain, and there we're going to get the sensation of hot or cold or whatever it is. If it's very hot, interestingly, we have a kind of a short circuit where those impulses don't reach all the way to the brain. They are of such a nature, they just go straight to the spinal cord and they send straight back to the muscles to withdraw the hand because it's just dangerous. A lot of reflexes from hot and cold can be generated in that way. Hearing again is very different. Here we have vibrations in the air, or actually can be through solid and liquid as well. And these are compressions and rarefactions or expansions. They pulse through the air, and we have a little eardrum, and that vibrates. So it's a very physical process. This expanding and contracting, this moving, vibrating, goes through into the inner ear where we have these tiny little hairs, these cilia, and they move, they vibrate, and that generates a nerve signal, again to the appropriate part of the brain. And this time, what comes up for us is a sense of sound. And if the waves are harmonious, then it sounds musical. And if they are quite jagged and rough, then it sounds edgy for us. So there's a correlation between our experience and the actual waves, which I would imagine if you're scientifically minded is pretty obvious. Seeing is the most complex. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on our seeing. And it's based on light. Now, light itself is quite a complex thing. It's often thought of as a particle wave particle, but we can think of it as a wave. And this wave is passing through the clear parts of the eye onto the retina at the back. And there it results in a chemical and nerve electrical change in the rods and cones, these light detecting parts of the retina. And of course, as usual, it turns into a nerve impulse, gets sent down into the relevant parts of the brain. And so we get to see a picture, but it's obviously much more complex. And we'll look into some of those complexities because we're getting two images, not a single one. And somehow, somewhere, we end up getting a single image. And there's a lot more to it than just that. So let's have a peek at that. But in fact, before we look at some of the details of it, what evolution has done, which is really intelligent, is taken the dominant frequencies of sound waves and light waves in the environment and made us able to detect them with a certain sensory experience. So of the electromagnetic waves, of which heat and light make up about 90% of what's in our environment. So those we have developed sensors to interpret those into experiences or sensations. And likewise, we can't hear all the sound vibrations, but we can hear the dominant frequencies, and those sound as low pitch when they are slow and high pitch when they are more rapid. And as we know, some animals can experience sounds and a light beyond the spectrum of what we can. So optical illusions, telling us a little bit more about how we process and make sense of the light impressions that reach our eye. Let's look at the picture on the right to start. You look at one part, it makes sense, but you look at the next and suddenly it looks like it's something else. And that's because over life, we develop a kind of a bank of images of making sense of reality. As we grow up, we create impressions in the mind, we cross-reference them with other senses like touch and so on, and end up saying, aha, when we get that impression, that's what it means. So the optical image illusion or whatever on the right-hand side is messing with that understanding of what reality is. And the left-hand side, well, that just depends what you're focusing on. If you're seeing the face looking down at the hand holding the moon, then you're looking globally. If you look more in detail, you'll see the face is actually two people embracing each other. And so this is the conscious mind paying attention to certain parts, allowing the unconscious mind to make sense of that. And the spinning dancer in the middle, it's actually a rotating image. You can Google it. She spins around. But I've got her stationary here so that we can see what the optical illusion of this thing is. I want you to look at her bottom foot, and I want you to imagine her foot is pointing into the page. The toes are into the page, the heel is sticking out, and then we were looking at her from behind. But we can alternatively imagine her toes coming out of the page towards us, in which case we are seeing her from the front. Then you can test it for yourself. If you can't get it now, pause the video, as you can with all of these optical illusions. And so we have an interaction of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind making sense of our sense impressions. Our eyes do also other interesting things like generate after images. The real South African flag is on the left. The picture down below has got the complementary colors, and our eyes have the capacity, if we expose them to colors for a certain amount of time, to generate out of themselves the complementary color, which then, in this case, should generate the real colors or close to the real colors of the South African flag. So the way you do it is as follows. You look at a little black dot at the end of the purple V, and just keep your eyes fixed on that dot. That's the key. If your eye wanders around, you won't generate the right after image. So if your eyes have that tendency, well, you will struggle. But if you can keep your eyes focused on the dot, eventually all the color between the different lines will start to blur and look a bit funny. And when that happens, you know you're on the right track. You don't have to focus hard. You can have a soft focus, but keep your eyes looking at the dot. And when those edges are really getting kind of uncomfortable, then turn your eyes and look at the black dot on the right-hand side, and you should see roughly the real colors of the South African flag just emerge if your eyes are relaxed enough. And every one of us does this. It's just for some people hard to get this particular experience. This is a practical example of how we make sense of or why we have this particular faculty, some usefulness for it. If you look at the center of the diagram, some of those circles towards the outside are going to appear as though they're rotating. And that's because our eye is creating the after image. So sometimes the nerve impulse is of the after image, sometimes it's of the real color. And in this case, they've used black and white, and they've used the blue and the yellow because those are all complementary colors. And some people hypothesize the kind of survival reason for this is so that we can detect movement. Our mind thinks there's movement simply because of that contrast of black and white. And the zebra, of course, uses it for its own survival purposes to confuse the predator. Here we have parallel lines. You can check it for yourself by pausing the video and examining them from above and below and so on, and check that they are indeed parallel. But our eyes interpret them, or our eyes see the real thing. The signals going to the brain interprets them to not be parallel. And that's just because they're comparing them to what we've seen before. And so you can see the mental process is crucially a part of how we make sense of our sense impressions. So the last one we're going to look at in this part one is, for me, the coolest one. because actually what you are actually seeing is a whole bunch of dots. That's it. That's what's there. But someone's computer generated this so that the dots will match. The dots you see with the one eye will match with dots you see with the other eye and create for us an impression of something that's there. So this is really how our mind is always looking to make sense and meaning out of what it is that is coming into the brain from the eyes. So if you've never seen them before, you can try this. You can move yourself so that your face is really close and it's all blurred. And when it's all nice and blurred, allow it to blur and just kind of look straight through the blurriness. Don't try and focus on anything. And as you move slowly away, your mind is working furiously to try and make sense of what it may be. And hopefully, if you are patient enough and relaxed enough in your eye and mind, your mind will generate a shock. And so this is a classic example of the incredible work that our mind does to make sense of the impressions of what come in. So that's all I'm going to cover for part one. Please join us for part two, where we will take these impressions and move them further into the workings of the mind and the conscious workings of the mind. See you shortly.